Sadie was everything you could say about a frontier woman. That she was, she didn't need a man to take care of her. She could take care of herself. She should have been born in this century. She'd have gone over big.
Men like Wyatt Earp, they shot their way to heaven. That's how one of Earp's friends described the man who has become synonymous with the West itself. Even if he didn't shoot himself into heaven, he certainly shot himself into history. Wyatt Earp would become a legend, the subject of books and movies for a gunfight in Tombstone, Arizona, and the vendetta he conducted in 1882 to eradicate the outlaws who maimed one of his brothers and killed another. He would again emerge in the midst of a national controversy in 1896 when his decision in a boxing match caused enormous controversy. Through the final 3 decades of his life, Wyatt continued to be a source of public interest. Newspapers would report his comings and goings, a mark of his celebrity. He was famous in a time when fame did not have the trappings of today's society. Long after the gun barrels cooled from the fight behind the OK Corral, Wyatt and his wife Josephine would wind up in Los Angeles, senior citizens struggling to survive on a small income. It was not all that long ago that Mr. and Mrs. Earp visited friends or would share an ice cream with a child. There are those who remember their footsteps echoing through their house and walking next to them on the street. These are the voices of those who knew the Earps and who remembered them, sometimes fondly, sometimes not.
Now, what's your earliest memory of meeting Sadie?
Honey, she practically lived at my grandmother's house, and she'd come and try to mooch meals off at our house, and my mother was having a very difficult time keeping body and soul together, and she'd peek in the window and say, "Alma, I see you and the girls under the bed. Come on." And she'd want something to eat. She was hungry. So, because she was a compulsive gambler, and every bit of money that came into to Wyatt, she spent on gambling. So there was very little food at his house.
So during it was during the Depression, the early years of the Depression, when Sadie would come in and try and get your mother Alma to feed her.
Yeah.
Did she knock on the door, or how did she do that?
Oh, she knocked on the door. She'd come to the window, or she'd scratch on the screen, or anything to get our attention some way. Of course, I was kind of a dumb kid, and I would go to the window and look at her and say, "Hi, Sadie."
Did you always call her Sadie, or did you ever?
Yep. That was her name, and that's what they called her. That's what Wyatt called her.
Right.
Yep.
Do you know how your grandfather met Wyatt Earp in the first place?
Oh, they just were cattlemen or something together. You know, just like they were. My grandfather used to build railroads coming from, I don't know, Kingman or someplace like that. And he built the road coming down Kingman into Needles, and then from Needles back into Kingman. But he built a lot of railroads.
Now, they also ran into each other in Alaska, didn't they?
Oh, yes. My grandfather brought up a bunch of heads of cattle, and Wyatt took up whiskey and whatever else they drank at the time. And my grandfather was very hungry for a shot of whiskey. And so he took in some meat, and he told Wyatt, they exchanged. And he says, "Well, you still owe me money, because the whiskey's more expensive than the beef." So my grandfather at that time made Wyatt pay $10 for a steak. And that was pretty high, because they just had this, I guess you call it camaraderie. They were just instant friends when they met. I think everything Sadie did was compulsive.
Yes.
She was a compulsive gambler. She gambled away his money, which was not that much. But when they came back from Alaska, they were as broke as they'd ever been.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they were going to go up to Alaska and make a fortune, you know. But just luck never came to Wyatt Earp.
Did anyone ever tell you anything about the way Wyatt dressed or what his clothes were like?
He dressed in khakis, just like everybody on the desert did.
Ah, okay.
You know, the khaki shirt and the khaki pants, and boots probably.
Right.
Lace-up boots. But
And everyone on the desert wore khakis? That was
yeah,
like a normal
the men did
outfit?
because it was so hot they couldn't wear the regular kind of pants, unless they wore Levi's, of course.
What kind of hats did they generally wear?
Oh, God. Like you have on, Casey. And like the straw ones,
Yes.
you know. And my dad always had a canvas hat, because he'd throw them away the minute they'd get a little bit sweaty. And Wyatt always wore stand-up crown like you have. He had a good hat for on special occasions, and he had several that were well worn. But I do know that he always had a hat.
Do you know what years it was that Wyatt and Sadie lived with your grandfather?
I think it was between like 1924 to 1928.
Okay.
You know, it was in that time, because I was going to school at St. Paul's, which was just up the street from where we lived. My grandmother, she would have a nice meal. We'd come from Mass on Sunday, and then she'd fix something. And then she'd say, Wyatt, you go on upstairs. They had one little bedroom upstairs. She said, you go upstairs and you lie down and you rest. And he did that one time and didn't get up to go anyplace for almost a month. He was there, my grandmother's house, and Aunt Stella was taking care of him. And that was the best time he had since he left the desert. And they took care of him as long as they could, you know, when he was sick. I don't know if he had kidney or bladder trouble, or maybe prostate.
Or all of the above at different
Yeah, yeah.
Why do you surmise that?
Because of the drinking and the bad food and the not having anything really healthy at times. So just kind of went hand in hand with desert living.
Yeah. Was there a time when, near the end of Wyatt's life, he came to the house and stayed and was ill? Will you tell us about that?
He was very ill. I can't think what they said it was. It was something with the kidneys. And my aunt took care of him up in my grandfather's bedroom, and kept him going for a good month. Pardon me. Like I said, I don't remember seeing Sadie there too much, except at mealtime.
And so he just became ill, and what, your Aunt Stella took care of him?
Yeah, she used to take care of him because Sadie couldn't go up the stairs. She was, pardon me, she just couldn't make it for some reason. I guess it was to keep from doing anything, so she stayed downstairs. But of course they didn't think he was dying. But I think everybody loved him very much.
Why do you think everybody loved him? What are some?
Because I don't think my Aunt Stella would have done what she did for him all the time, because she liked Sadie, but it wasn't any, you know, big friendship or anything. But she always felt so sorry for Wyatt, because he had always been such a vigorous person, and to be so sickly. So, but it was a long time coming on, probably. I remember when Mr. Earp died, because Sadie was not going to go to his funeral. She was not going to go wherever they were going to bury him. In fact, she put her hands up and she says, "You go." She told my mother and Aunt Grace, so they got on the train and went to wherever. But they had to go watch him be cremated.
They witnessed who?
Yeah, that was the law then.
It was your Aunt Grace and who that
And
witnessed?
my mother.
And your mother Alma, who witnessed the cremation.
Yep.
And why didn't Sadie go to the?
She didn't want to.
Was she
Whether
doing?
she was brokenhearted, or whether she just couldn't handle it, or whatever, she just didn't want to go, and she wouldn't.
What did she do instead? Do you know?
She might have gone and played cards, but my mother was, of course, she was all for it to go, and Aunt Grace, of course, they were nosy as hell. They wanted to see what it was like,
Right.
and they wanted to see the body sit up in case, you know, the muscles or the ligaments got pulled. But no, they went there. So I know we used to see Sadie a lot after Wyatt died, and she did have on a navy blue dress that was supposed to be like a dress-up dress, you know.
Oh, she did have
Yeah, and it was navy blue. I just remembered that. And she'd come over and fan herself, you know, with the hanky, and my aunt and she would get their heads together. Oh, God, I wish she was alive. She could tell you plenty. But
That was one of her mannerisms? She'd fan herself with her
well,
hanky?
she did after Wyatt died.
Ah.
So she'd take her hanky from here and then go like this. I do remember seeing her do that. I really did see her do that.
Remember her talking about Wyatt or very much?
Well, she kind of mourned him a lot, but not too much, you know. It was, oh, Wyatt. Oh, Wyatt. You know, whatever she called him, she had a pet name for him. And, but other than that, it was just, I think she missed him because she needed somebody to take care of her.
There were stories in Tombstone that Sadie was involved in prostitution there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What did your dad tell you about that?
Well, see, this is the kind of thing that my father wouldn't have said anything to me about. So he just would have said that Wyatt was an old gosh darn it, because he had a little fingers in the pie too somewhere. So, but not like they've put, like I've seen in magazines and books and things about owning a house of ill repute. He did have something to do with the Alhambra. I do remember hearing that.
Right.
And that
right.
was a hotbed of
Gambling.
intrigue. Yeah.
Yes. But wasn't there a family story about Sadie? Weren't you told through your family that Sadie had been a prostitute at some point?
Oh yeah, she'd probably been a good one. Yeah.
She had at the time her little naughtiness and her
Yeah.
toughness. She had a wig,
Yeah, well, she did.
and we're not talking about the wigs that you wear on your head.
No.
How did that come up, and what do you recall about people saying about that?
Well, see, now Sadie and my Aunt Stella used to do a lot of talking, but I never heard. And Aunt Stella told me enough with the one little thing she told me, and I didn't want to hear anymore.
Tell us what your Aunt Stella told about the pubic wig.
Oh no, you're terrible.
No, this is none of us had ever heard of that. So you.
Well, who would, I mean, it isn't common knowledge, but she was very naughty, very, very naughty.
But the being naughty meant having been a.
Yeah, been a hooker. I'm sure that's what they meant, because they knew that my sister and I were listening around. I'd think it bothered Tina, but I would always listen around and hear what was going on. Then I'd ask Aunt Stella, what did that mean?
Well, what did Stella tell you about it? What did
Well, she told me, she said she liked to play tricks, and she liked to be devilish, so she had a wig made for herself, a little one, and whenever anybody would come to be with her, she did that, and I don't know what else she told me about it. She had it and she'd flip it off. It was weird. I told her, I said, Aunt Stella, why'd you tell me that? I don't want to think of that. Kind of a shocker. She was kind of a fascinating person. I think maybe that's why I felt sorry for her, because she kind of grabbed your interest. For whatever reason, I don't know.
Was she talkative with the children?
No, children were just a thing that was around, you know, that if you had them, you had them, and that was all there was. But to come up and go coochie coochie coo or anything like that, she didn't.
She would do that to the men?
Oh, of course, but of course. Men were very important to her.
Did you ever see, in watching movies, did you ever see anyone who played Sadie who was anything like her, or?
Yeah, the last one, the one that I saw with
Kurt Russell.
With Kurt Russell, yeah. And the Sadie that they played, she was a thin, dark-haired girl, and she was cute as a bug. She reminded me that she could have been like Sadie until she got older and put on the weight and whatever. I don't know how she put on the weight with what, but that was the cutest, that was the nicest one, I thought. And they even called her, not Sadie, but they called her Josie.
When you looked at Sadie, you didn't look at her as being beautiful, but very attractive.
No, she wasn't very attractive, not in her old age, honey.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I know when I first saw one of the movies came on, it was with Marie Osmond. She was Sadie in it, and she was so saintly and pure that it just made me sick, because Sadie was a spitfire. She was not the kind of person that would hold back. If she wasn't the center of it, she didn't like it. She was no little gentle flower. She might have been in her early age. Get away from there. And because she was cute and she was very, very attractive at that time. She had gone to school. She had had good schooling.
Did she?
Good bringing up, yeah. But she just was a little renegade. She didn't want to be like everybody else. And she was very short, very, very tiny. And and of course that would make Mr. Earp feel very manly, because he was very, very particular about how you treated women. And
now, when you told me about her before, you described you and Grace together. You described her most her most. When she'd walk into a room, there'd be something.
They came in before she did. She was humongous. I can kill you.
Well, I put it in the book.
Oh, I know. Oh, God. Yeah, they were there 10 minutes before she got there. Well, you know, they've made her like she was a beautiful, dreamy, doll-like person, and she wasn't. She was cute, no doubt. She was very cute, and she had a wonderful personality. And but there wasn't any beauty or anything connected with it, because she was very tiny, very short. She was never heavy looking, except up top.
Right.
But she had little hips, little legs. I remember this because walking away from us, she didn't look half bad. But coming towards us, she could mow you down.
When you say Sadie was short, how short was?
Oh, honey, she was barely 5 feet.
Wow.
Yeah, she was very short. My grandmother was not quite 5 feet, and they would talk face to face. There was no problem.
Do you recall the last time that you saw Sadie, or was there anything special about it? Or
No, Casey, I just remember her dresses. I really do. They were embedded in my brain. I never saw her dressed up, you know, like they did in the old days. Sunday, they go to church or whatever, and then come back. But she never had on a fancy dress that I ever saw. I don't know how she ever made it over to Hollywood to the director that she was dealing with at the time, because Aunt Stella used to say, she doesn't even wash. Why doesn't she get cleaned up? She was terrible. Yep.
She didn't wash?
Didn't wash. Well, she didn't have time. She was always looking for something to eat, you know, someplace to rest.
Did she have body odor and things like that?
Oh, I don't know, honey, but I imagine so, because she was so careless is what it was. I don't know if she was so dirty. She just was very careless. So I never wanted her to hug me. Her little dresses were sleeveless and straight, and they had a V-neck here, of course, but they were just common everyday house dresses.
What colors?
Oh, prints, honey. They had prints all the time, but her aprons were kind of greasy looking, and so was the front of her dress if she wore it more than a week. In those days, no deodorant. But anyhow, she was only looking out to go to the card game. That was really her whole thing in life, was going to the card game. I think she thought if she wore the apron over her dirty dress, that would keep it from being noticed. But she wasn't the least bit caring about her personal self. She just never... She didn't go out, didn't do anything except eat, get up, sleep, and go play cards. And because I remember hearing my grandmother say, if she would just stop, and fix for, they were worried about him not eating and him not this and him not that, because he was my grandfather's friend. And Sadie was just his wife.
Right.
And they all knew that she was kind of, well, in some words, she was unacceptable to them. Because my grandmother was kind of, like I said, she was straight-laced, but Aunt Stella wasn't. But she still find it hard to excuse her for all the dumb things she did.
At one point, you talked about Sadie's hair. Could you tell us a little bit about her hair?
Sadie's hair?
Yes.
Well, it was very thick, and she wore it quite short when I was around. Pardon me. It was combed back, you know, and shingled in the back, as they called it. And she did anything that would keep her from having to do extra. She wasn't that industrious, because she had to get to the card table. And it was really a compulsion, a bad one. I mean, she was there. She could sit at the table for almost 12 hours and never move a muscle. She was that compulsive. It's just not me saying it. But I know all I ever heard, from my grandmother or my Aunt Stella, I never heard that Sadie or this and that. But they used to say, oh, poor Wyatt, poor Wyatt. But he stuck by her no matter what. He loved her. I guess he loved her. And they were married, and they seemed to be happy when they were together. It was a gentleman's agreement, and he just stuck to it. Wyatt always said, Sadie, and when he'd say Sadie, Sadie would look up and go to him. This is what Aunt Stella used to tell me. He was law. So, but anyhow, it was a typical old-time marriage, you know. The man was always the head honcho, and the woman was, yes, dear. You're so right. That time slot. I think he was just doing for her because he had told her he was going to take care of her and he was going to do this and do that, and they had big visions of grandeur, and I don't think it ever happened.
Do you remember what her voice sounded like?
Yeah, I sure do. It was kind of high and nasal. I don't know if it was just because I was a child and I could hear that, but she could be so, I don't know, it was strange because she could take guff or be insulted. It didn't bother her in the slightest as long as she had her money to go play cards every day. And she was a card-playing lady.
Yes.
And what else did she do? I can see her peeking in our bedroom window. She'd go through like this with the mirror, with the window, and she'd peek in and, I see you in there, Alma. My mother would say, get under the bed. So we'd want to get under the bed.
And you did that so that she wouldn't...
Because my mother didn't have enough food to go around. She
Yes.
just had it for us. And I know on Sunday dinner, my grandmother always had enough for everybody in the block if they came in. She was very gracious.
So did Sadie come to Sunday dinner sometimes?
Yeah, she could always come to dinner on Sunday.
What do you remember from talking to her? What was she like?
Well, she didn't have too much time for me, but she was a talker. But she didn't talk about the old days as I remember. She talked about whatever she was interested in at the time.
Ah.
So I kind of felt sorry for her because I didn't know who she was or what she was, or what was going on. And Aunt Grace said she was from a beautiful family in San Francisco. When she went up there one time to be with some relative or something, they went into the city, and there was this beautiful candy store where Aunt Grace said she saw everything in the world she ever wanted because she loved candy. And she said they were just so kind and sweet people. She says, I just couldn't imagine Sadie coming from these people because she was kind of on the tough side and a little on the, just a little vulgar. She must have been the little weirdo in the family or something because she was very strange.
When you say strange, what do you mean? How was she strange?
Well, she was a nonconformist, that was for sure.
Tell more.
Well, she just didn't do what everybody expected her to do. be gracious and nice and be a lady. It didn't come to her that way. I don't know why. But of course, I didn't know at the time. But
Well, when you say that, can you describe a little bit about how she was not, how she acted in that regard?
she was kind of tough. Like she was streetwise. And of course, I don't know. She just was. It's kind of shocking to my grandmother because my grandmother was very straight-laced. And my grandfather wasn't, but she was. Like I said, I used to feel kind of sorry for Sadie. I don't know what it was I felt sorry for her for, but she always kind of like an outsider looking in. So I don't think she ever felt completely joined with anybody. She did love Wyatt. I heard my Aunt Stella tell me that a lot of times. She says, oh, she was so crazy about that man. But she was so crazy about him that she took his paycheck every week, or his retirement pay from the being a marshal. And I think that my grandmother had him over for dinner one night, and he says, oh, Mrs. Welch, it's so nice to sit down and have a dinner. He says, all I've eaten is hot dogs. She bought a couple of pounds of those, you know, in the old days they used to be together, all strung out. Pardon me. And she would give him a hot dog for lunch, a hot dog for breakfast, and I don't know what else for dinner. But
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty bad. And he never had a square meal until he came to my grandmother's house. And my Aunt Stella was a marvelous cook, so she'd cook fancy stuff for him and fix him all up, and so he'd have a good meal under his belt, as she said, because he was a big man. To them, he was big. They were less than 5 feet.
Can you remember as a child what it was like when you and your sister and your mother were sitting in the house and you were just starting to eat dinner, and all of a sudden the rap came at the door and you could look out and see the figure? What happened? What was that like?
Oh, God. It was hurry, hurry, quick, quick, grab up the food. It's him or me. That was the way it was. Because this was in the bad days of the Depression, yeah. I didn't know we were poor, but it was that time, you know, in our lives.
So you'd grab up the food, and then what would happen?
My mother would say, eat it, you know, because she can't have it. God. My poor mother was always trying to keep us healthy.
Wasn't there a time, too, where your mother saw her coming and asked you to all run in and hide under the bed?
Yeah, that's what we always did, was get under the bed. And then she'd peek in the window and she'd say, Elma, I see you and the girls. I used to think, gee, this is fun. Oh, God. I always kind of felt sorry for her. I really did. I felt sorry for Sadie.
Why?
But
Why? Why?
why?
Why did you feel sorry?
I don't know. It just, you know how some people can touch your heart? Well, she kind of touched mine, but not for any reason other than I heard a lot of stories, and as a kid, I didn't pay any attention and I didn't care. But as it happened, I just, you know, I just would put it away. And, but I always felt kind of, I always hated people to make fun of anybody. I always hated to see somebody left out, because my famous words when I was a little kid was, aren't you glad you came? If you'd come to my house or something, I used to say, aren't you glad you came? And I guess that's the way I was with her. Sometimes I'd wonder why we had to hide, because there maybe would be a little extra or something. And my mother was not a selfish person, but her kids came first. My mother said a couple of times, she says, I'd like to kick her out and never see her again. And my sister said, right, you know, because she didn't like her either. My grandmother, of course, I don't think Grandma really ever cared for her, but she did like Wyatt because he was my grandfather's friend. And the things that, I don't know, just, Sadie was what she was. She was who she was.
Now, your family always liked Wyatt, I understand.
Oh, yeah.
Your father and your mother liked Wyatt.
My dad, too.
Yeah, can you remember some of the reasons that they said that they liked Wyatt?
They just said he was very honorable, and he was courteous to an extent. He was very, very particular about women. And my other aunt was at the house, and her husband came with her, and he was drunk, and he was very abusive to her verbally. But Mr. Earp said to Jimmy, was his name, and he had been drunk, and he told my aunt to shut up, and Wyatt told him that was not necessary. He stood up to his full height, whatever, and he looked at Jimmy and he says, "We don't talk like that to women in this family."
Oh my!
And he was very mad about it. Aunt Grace said he was just fuming because she was at the table when it happened, and he says, "You talk to her nicely." Well, he wouldn't, so Wyatt escorted him out of the dining room, told him to go in the front room of the kitchen or go on and get out. So, but other than that, I don't. Oh, I do too know. He always would stand up real quick, take his hat off, and never sit in the room with a hat on. And he always was very particular. He was just of the old school, you know. He liked courtesy and nice things. He was kind of like on the pedestal for everybody to go ooh and ah over him at the table, because they were all mostly women, and they all thought he was great because he was so kind to women. He loved women, and I don't mean in a bad way. He loved them respectfully and kindly and stuff like that. And when you weren't, look out.
How did the men talk about Wyatt in later years, your father and the other men who knew him?
Oh, my dad never said anything, but he was a wonderful man. He was a kind, loving person. I don't know what kind of a religion he was in, but I know his family was very, very close.
Were people aware that he had a past? I mean, were people in the family aware that he had a past?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it...
Yes, it wasn't uncommon knowledge.
Can you kind of give a picture of how you see Wyatt Earp?
I see him as a good man, maybe tempted a little too much to the extreme, but I think he was a good man. And if my grandmother liked him, he must have been, or my grandfather, because they were very, very funny people. I think with his first wife, Wyatt's first wife, the one he was so in love with,
yes,
the young woman, when she died, I think that just about flipped him out. So that's just from my own observation, not from anybody else's.
Was there ever any talk about Wyatt or Sadie doing any drinking?
No, I don't think they did. I really don't. I know that my grandmother would have hated it. My grandfather drank, and I'm sure that they had their little snorts once in a while, but I don't think they drank to excess. I don't even think Sadie did.
Do you remember anything about Sadie's connections with Hollywood, about her taking trips over to the studio, or her talking about it?
I don't know how the heck she got over there, honey, because she didn't drive, and unless they sent a car for her, I have no idea how she made it over there. I just, they would say something, well, Sadie's gone today, or something like that, because she was the topic of conversation for quite a while after Wyatt died. But Sadie, she loved being in the limelight, and she loved getting the attention that money could bring her. So, that's, I think, why I felt sorry for her. I didn't know we were poor, and she thought we were rich. But she used to sure go to her, I don't know whether they were the Jewish Ladies Card Club that she belonged to, but they used to go, like I said, they'd go every day. And maybe some days she'd win, and some days, most of the time, she lost, because she was, like I said, compulsive. She took chances when they weren't necessary. And this is what my father said, right, and my Aunt Grace. So it just was real bad. She was past, I don't think they could have ever corrected her, cured her of her gambling compulsion. But. And
she was often short of money?
Always, never had enough money to do nothing. she wanted money, period. That was all she cared about. So I don't know whether it was for her card game or for her just herself. But I remember in one of the movies that I saw about Wyatt Earp, they were going to go to the gold country and make $1 million, and they were going to be happy because she could have everything she ever wanted. And I know it was a part of the movie that they were taking advantage of, but it was true. That trip was to make them wealthy till they died. See, she was always going to get rich.
Right.
And her greed, or whatever you call it, always overtook her because she fixed herself out of that movie thing. She fixed herself out of her real story. And she fixed herself with Wyatt because the poor man was always hungry. And that is a thing that you, in that era, you don't do to people. You keep everybody's dignity up with a full stomach. Well, they had a little court. They didn't call them little apartments. They were little courts. And I guess they had the driveways between. And when they went to their little court, I think it had a bedroom and then maybe a little kitchenette or something. And that's all, but that was never used. But maybe to make coffee or something, I don't know. But that's where they lived. And the bedroom was the front room. It was a well, you know what a little Hollywood thing is, court is. That's what they lived in. And they lived there till he died. So it wasn't anything elaborate. They always wanted the glamour, but they never got it.